Hey, Allison. It's great to be here with you today.
You too. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So, look, we've had a couple of really fun talks. One actually in person, which was really fun. Just timing happened to work. And I'm excited to have you on here today and just really dig a little bit more into you, the epicenter, your vision, and yeah, maybe just share a little bit about what you're building, if that works.
Yeah, that sounds great. Thank you.
Cool. So, what is the epicenter? Why are you building it? Why is this your thing? I'd love to start there.
So, the vision for the Epicenter is a retreat center for, I call it kids, but really anybody ages 9 to 22 ish.
Mhm.
Um, why am I building it is a really good question. Uh, it's something that's been in my heart since I was 3. So, I've been compelled to do this for a really long time and I've avoided it. And I think now it's unavoidable. So, here I am.
Yeah.
Uh, And the intention behind it is to provide a space for young people to be really what they are.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is all of the things that we have to express and give to the world that we normally don't get a chance to express because our society just tells us in so many different ways who it is that we're supposed to be, what it is we're supposed to be giving, what we're supposed to be for this for society, and giving people a space to actually express themselves
Mm.
is incredibly powerful.
Mm.
It's transformative. So that's what I'm creating.
Amazing. We're going to spend most of the time on the epicenter itself, but 3 is so young. Like, how on earth, did this journey start at 3? And it's also specific. I have a 4-year-old, so like I feel how young 3 is and how amazing that is in some ways. Like, tell us a little bit more about that if you're open to it.
Sure, yeah. I was 3 when my sister was born, and I remember very distinctly her coming home from the hospital and me meeting her for the first time. And it's almost hard to describe, but there was this glowing that she had, this
Mm.
truth about her of what she was. You could just see it. I could just
Yeah.
see it. And I realized in that moment, I'd never seen that in another person.
Mm.
I'd actually never experienced that. I had yet to go to school and meet other children. I'm not even sure I really played with that many other kids when I was that age. So all I had were adults really to look towards. And in that moment, I just realized, oh, something's lost
Mm.
as we get older, or maybe not in everybody, but in a lot of people, something's lost. And this that I'm seeing right now is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. And
Mm.
I can't forget that. And so in that moment, somehow it just came to me. I'm meant to work with people to bring out this. And so I articulated as being a teacher because I didn't know. I was 3. I only had a limited vocabulary. And my parents were really against my being a teacher. That's why it took a while for me to get here. But I've known from a very young age. I said I wanted to start a school and be a teacher. And my parents were like, no, try
Yeah.
again.
Yeah.
uh, yeah, and it's not meant to be a school. I realize that now, and I'm not really a teacher, but that came in that moment.
Yeah. And you mentioned it before, but I can imagine that experience with your parents has a big influence on you of people just becoming who they're meant to be or authentically sort of express themselves. And, I would imagine if, a teacher is like such a worthy, beautiful thing. It's not like some, destructive habit or something like that. And, but if I remember, they wanted you to be a doctor or go to med school or something, and you did that for a little bit, and then obviously chose a different path. But talk to us about that and what you did and what you learned and sort of when you pivoted and why.
Yeah, so my parents were pretty clear that teaching was not an option, and by the time I was 13, I kind of forgot that I had that in my heart. And that's how easy I think it is for us to lose
Yeah.
what's actually in us. And I was convinced that I was going to be a doctor. And I figured if I'm going to be a doctor, I'm interested in people and who they are. So I thought I'll be a neurosurgeon. So I decided I was going to be a neurosurgeon at the age of 13. And I lived in an incredibly supportive community. So I worked in a hospital. I actually got to do surgeries when I was in high school, which probably shouldn't have been allowed, but anyway, I did them. I contributed to surgeries, 2 of them when I was in high school. I worked in a lab at a pharmaceutical company so I could have my research experience. Like I had everything handed to me. I was so fortunate. And I went to school to study neuroscience. So I went to one of the 2 programs that existed in the country at the time. I didn't want for anything. And yet my sophomore year of college, I was so sick because I was so far away from what was actually true for me. I went away to Spain for a summer and just wrote, traveled around and wrote. And because I was away from everybody, it started to come back to me. Oh, I didn't want this. Like, no wonder I don't feel well. So I came back emboldened. I'm going to start this school. And my parents are like, no, you're not. So they said, well, you do research. Why don't you go into research? So I did that for a while because I acquiesced. I said, okay, I could do that. And it sounds silly, like, why can't I just be strong in the face of this? But the reality is that the forces of our society are really, really strong. And when you don't feel like you have support, like you're stepping out into an abyss as it is, if there's nobody there who's like cheering you on,
Yeah.
it takes so much courage. I just didn't have it, especially at the age of 20. So anyway, I did research for a while. And then I started a nonprofit that helped scientists be more sustainable. So I did that for a really long time. And that was kind of my like sidestep into, I don't know, human behavior and teaching, as it were, trying to help people see something differently. And then after finishing that or resigning from that, I finally was like, if I don't do this now, I'm never going to do this. So here I am. It took a while.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And I will say my family's still very much not supportive, but it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
But like, would it be like if it didn't take this long? If like, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's amazing, whether it's an idea, a company, a passion, it's so fragile in those early days, right? Like that first mention to your partner, your friend, your parents, whatever, it could be life changing, right? It's either like no, or it's like, oh, okay, I guess I'm stupid, or I guess that's a dumb
Yes.
idea, or oh my God, that's so amazing. Like, let's explore.
Mhm.
And yeah, like again, it's happened so often to me of both, like for good and for bad, that micro reaction is so like full of potential, right? Negatively and positively. And like that spark one way or the other. And I become really actually like careful and thoughtful of who I share those like early fragile things with because I don't want it to break. And it's most of the time it's not malicious of like boss, you're stupid or that's never gonna work. But that difference of just like, whoa, that could be so cool. Tell me more versus, huh, why? Like it doesn't even have to be just like,
Huh?
no, that's supportive. And yeah, so I don't want to preempt the discussion, but I'm guessing that's what the epicenter is for, to help kids kind of find that natural path and nurture that. But yeah, just tell us more rather than me guessing about it.
Yeah, yeah. So the way that we work now, so I'll talk about the way that we work now and then the vision for it. So we bring kids together in spaces and we ask questions. Why is it that you feel this way? What is it that excites you? What does it feel like when you're doing the thing that really excites you? Really to help them get back in touch with the feeling first, because a lot of people have even lost that.
Yeah.
And as an example, yesterday we were in class and we were going around talking about that. What does it feel like when you're doing that thing that you love before
Yeah.
we even identify what it is? And one of the girls in the class, she identified it as when everybody was paying attention to her,
Hmm.
which is very different than actually what it feels like when you're doing this thing that you love. So already she'd kind of lost that connection of what that is. And then we dive into, well, what actually is it?
Hmm.
And helping them realize that it's probably not going to be a job.
Yeah.
That's, I think, one of the biggest just accidental mistakes people make is that they try to figure out what they love and then they try to fit it into a job without realizing that most jobs were not created to be fulfilling and satisfying to our being. They're functional.
Yeah.
So
And Allison, do you think that's changing on the work front, right? Like it feels, in my little niche of the world, like there's more opportunities to do those kind of more crafty things, whether it's through software or, just distribution awareness is a little bit easier with Instagram and Twitter and whatever. Do you think that's converging or no? Like, is it still kind of like a pretty stark split on functional versus meaningful?
It's a really good question. I think it depends where you are in the country. So when we were working in California, I would say yes, it felt like there was a lot more openness in realizing from all areas, from parents and from kids, that it might not need to be functional. Although there is still a pretty heavy emphasis on tech
Yeah.
there. Here in Michigan, it's much more manufacturing. So actually, people really do see themselves as part of a machine. Like the language they use is very much of that industrial age language. Uh, so that also is very interesting because there is not a lot of uniformity. And when I work with people on the East Coast, it feels very different. So there's a lot of regional differences that I notice in how people talk about jobs and talk about their role in society. And that just again illustrates just how much we're influenced by the social constructs that we grow up in and how limiting those ideas and thought patterns can be, even if we're not aware of them. So here people might be told like you can be anything, but that anything looks like
Yeah.
this manufacturing plant, right?
Yeah.
And in Silicon Valley, you can be anything, but that anything looks like tech. So it still has a boundary condition around it that we seek to just obliterate.
Yeah.
And then a lot of it, the rest of what we talk about is how do we get back to recognizing what's in our hearts versus what's in our heads? How
Yeah.
do we get out of our heads and these thought patterns that keep us locked into a certain way of being, certain way of thinking, and come back to what does our heart say? What does our gut say?
Yeah.
And through that, we do a lot of exercises and we do a lot of art. So we
Mm.
do a lot of creative self-expression, and that looks like a variety of things. So it's not just painting, although of course, especially for little kids, we have paints.
Yeah.
They need paints. They love paints. But we do music and movement. We made a video over the summer with the kids. They wanted to make a movie, so we made a movie. We really let them guide what the expression wants to look like.
Mm.
But we want them to understand that there's a direct line between what's happening here and what comes out.
Yeah.
So if you aren't aware of that, you can accidentally create a lot of really detrimental things for yourself and harmful behaviors
Yeah.
without any awareness.
Yeah. And is there is there a magic number to 9, or why not 7, or why not 6? Like, is it a legal thing, or like, because I'd imagine the earlier you can start this, hopefully, the fewer bad habits, hopefully
Yeah.
the easier it is. But like, yeah, tell me why that age range. And that's a pretty big age range, right? Like, so how do they work together? How do they learn from each other? What does that look like?
So the retreat is meant to be 9 to 22, mostly because of the overnight component to it. So we're going to have people stay for a week or two. And we've just found that younger than 9, it's just hard on them. They they want to be home. And I get that. When we work in these smaller settings, kind of with other organizations, we'll go down to as young as 5.
Mm.
For the reasons you're mentioning. So we can easily work with kids who are, I mean, we work with kids who are even younger. It's just that needs a lot more nurturing because they don't have as much awareness of what happened a few days ago. As someone who's 5, 6, they're able to remember and recall a little bit easier. But yeah, in principle, there's no reason why you couldn't start this and actually shouldn't start it earlier. So we try to work with parents as well to say, hey, look, here's some ideas, some ways that you can work with your kids to help keep this alive in them. Um, but yeah, for overnights, probably best for the kids to be able to not freak out. And then we don't tend to work with students ages 9 to 22 or even 7 to 22 at once. Um, we tend to group them in really narrow age bands. And that's because developmentally what they're most concerned about is similar, and we want to address those things. So as an example, over the summer, the 7, 8-year-olds, they're still trying to work out like this person likes me, this person doesn't like me. And I thought we were best friends an hour ago, and now we're not best friends, and I'm having an absolute meltdown. By the time you're 11, that's not the situation. And now you're dealing with actual bullying in school. Like somebody doesn't respect my being, and how do I handle that? It's a very different thing. And by the time you're in high school, the pressure is on, and you've almost lost all that creativity. So we spend a lot of time just being like, hey, what does it feel like to skip around the hallways? Can you remember that? So because of that, we try not to bring them together until they've all gotten back at least to themselves. And then we bring the high school kids with the younger kids, and then they can really learn from each other. And that's beautiful. But taking a high school kid with a 7-year-old before they really are aware just ends up with them lecturing a 7-year-old on how to be. And that's
Yeah.
not helpful.
Yeah, we spoke about this a lot, but it's been one of the coolest things of becoming a dad, to just like be a kid again, right? To like roll around and play in the dirt, and like it's such a beautiful thing, which again, like there's no way I'd be doing that without her, right? Like I would have just like skipped down the hallways or go roll in the grass or something without that. But it's such a magical thing. So okay, so we spoke about kind of like the art and the creativity, and sounds like so much of it is just about awareness, right? How does that make you feel? Where's the gap? How do we close that gap? What else do you do? And we have a lot of parents in this community, so I want to make sure we get back to like, what can we do, right? Day to day and week to week and month to month, to like do this at home without sort of an epicenter across the world yet, at least. So yeah, talk to us more just about that, like awareness and that language and what you do, and then maybe what we can do as parents at home.
Yeah, so I would say to start, it's really important to understand the philosophical underpinnings of where this comes from. And so this comes from really some work I did in 2018, where I helped write a book on consciousness. And this was so important for me to get clear on what I understood about consciousness and creativity. And so this is just a perspective. I'm really, really clear also with all of this. This is a perspective. It's not capital T truth. If your experience is different, that's awesome. Share it. Like this is not meant to be a lecture on what is real and what is true. So in this perspective around consciousness, and I'm just real high level overview, our consciousness, personal consciousness, creates separation, an understanding that I am different and separate from you, which can be really helpful because it creates space. And it's in that space that we can create. The other experience that we can have, or another experience we can have, is the non-separate space, which is what happens when you meditate and you just dissolve into the world. In the non-separate space, you connect with everything and you understand that you are not separate from everything. But there isn't really an opportunity to create in that space. So from my perspective, you need both. You need to be able to understand the separate space, and you need to be able to understand and know the non-separate space. So
Why can't you create from the connected space?
yeah, that's a really good question. And I've talked to people about this a lot. If you fully dissolve into something, think about it. Are you moving? Are you thinking? Right. You're not doing anything. And that's all. There's great utility to this. Ideas often come in that space. But
Isn't that a form of creation?
Really good question. So I guess it depends how you feel an idea comes. So to me, the idea comes outside of me. It always feels like it's coming from outside of me. If you feel like the idea is being generated within you, then yeah, that is a form of creation. Super interesting question. I guess it depends.
Think about that more. Yeah, it's like I think we maybe touched on part of this, but I think it was the Elizabeth Gilbert TED Talk on creativity, where she's like, she feels like it's a muse, like coming from outside, and she's driving on the highway. And she's like, "Get away from me! Like now's not the right time." And I've had some of those experiences, but mainly I feel like it's like inside out, and maybe that's just like being too connected. But anyway, we don't need to dwell on
it's
this.
okay.
Here, but,
It's so interesting. Well, I do feel like the expression is absolutely inside out. And sometimes it's an interplay of you with something that's greater than you. But I would say it's that expression to me that's the creative act. And that requires the separateness. So this understanding is critical to me for a couple of reasons. One of the reasons people feel so isolated and alone is because they only experience the separateness. They don't experience the non-separateness. And the knowing that actually I'm you, you're me, I'm everything, you're everything. You're never alone. You can't be. It's impossible. Um, so there's that component of it. Um, there's also a component that when you realize that you are everything and everything is you, you start to really see the world very differently in terms of what it's trying to tell you. It's not, everything isn't against you. It's just well, what is that? What am I meant to learn from this here? What is this person able to show me that I'm missing? You really change your perspective and you become really curious.
Yeah.
And so this is fundamental to our work, is curiosity. So when we are working with kids, I have no idea. Well, I mean, that's not actually true, but I take the position. I have no idea what people are meant to do. And when I say that's not actually true, it's because I can see it in people, but I don't tell them ever, because it's not for me to tell them. It's for them to discover for themselves. If I tell them, it becomes another coat of paint, just like everything else. What good is that? So it's a lot of questions, and they're very open-ended questions. They're not like me going, I know what it is, so I'm going to ask all the questions so you see it. It's more just like, tell me about that. And it's genuine curiosity. So that's really, really important. And then helping them understand what it means to be a creative being. So because we exist in the space where there's space between us and we're constantly creating, we help them understand that you're creating all the time. It's not just, oh, this work of art I made or this thing I've written. It's what you create with your intentions. It's what you create with your words. It's what you create with your being, with how you feel today. When you walk into a space, people feel that, whether they're aware of it or not. So we spend a lot of time in that understanding of like, what is it that you're creating? Do you mean to be creating that? Do you want to be creating that?
Yeah. And
Um,
that agency feels so important. Again, we talk about this a lot with our girls, but like that mindset of things are happening to me versus like it is, right? And what can you kind of take from it? But it's such a hopeless feeling that if the world is just doing things to you all, of course you're like depressed. Of
yes.
like
And anxious. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yes.
And I guess like, you know, um, how how do the kids push back, or like what is that journey? I'm sure it's idiosyncratic and super unique to everyone, but like stages of grief type stuff, like is there any like normal sort of pattern? Like, I don't even know what you're telling me, Allison, at first, and then it's sort of, oh, interesting, like I haven't felt joy in a long time, and that's like a spark of like, what does that journey sort of look like? And again, we're generalizing here, but just to maybe understand a little bit at a high level.
Yeah. So the last component, and this is the part where we get the most pushback, is being fully present. So we don't have, like, I'm not there. I'm there. I'm obviously fully present there, but my ego is nowhere to be seen in this room. When somebody shares with me what they're going through, I don't immediately go to my own experience and tell them, oh, I've had a similar thing. It's not about me, it's about them. So that radical presencing of somebody can be very uncomfortable for people who haven't been seen. So a lot of kids who crave it and almost know that they crave it, they are like sponges to it. They can't get enough, and they're totally fine in that environment. But every so often we have kids who just want to hide, and that can be really uncomfortable for them. So for them, they will often not make eye contact. We've had kids hide under their clothing to not be seen. Um, we even had a kid over the summer who tried to run away the first day because he really didn't want to be seen. But then he also felt that there was something about us that felt nice. So he did this really interesting thing where he would run away, but he obviously wasn't allowed to run away from the school. So I would stand in front of the door. And so he was half serious, but what he actually wanted was to be hugged. But he didn't want to say he wanted to be hugged. So he would run into me so that I would almost fall into him and give him like an accidental hug. And then he would calm down for a minute. And it's just so interesting, like these things that happen. We get the most pushback in terms of the idea around like being a creative person, having agency over yourself from older students, people in college, because they it's frightening in some ways to say. It's wonderful, but it's empowering to realize you have agency, but it's also terrifying. um now you have to own a lot of things that you've done. And that can be really overwhelming. And then, of course, the adults we work with, that's the hardest. So we tiptoe into that. It's a much longer process.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if you're listening and feeling a lot of like, it's okay. It's okay. I know it's hard. Growing up is hard when nobody's giving you space to be for a long time.
It's the radical extreme version of that. I think Dostoevsky said is like, it's maybe a helpful or healthy mindset to assume you're responsible for everything. And that's scary as hell. And I don't know if I fully agree with that, but it's at least, in my opinion, maybe like a healthier way to approach the world than I have no agency and I'm not responsible for anything. Probably somewhere in between, but yeah. So it's just such a, yeah, we've spoken a lot about this, but just those like little moments can make just such a big difference. And um, before we shift to maybe what we can do as parents at home without an epicenter in our backyard and all that stuff, what else about the program or the approach or the philosophy have we maybe not covered yet that's worth diving into?
A good question. I think.
And let me like regurgitate maybe to make sure it's like sinking in on me, right? But it's like just an egoless curiosity and a total presence, a total awareness. Maybe like a lack of nudging even, which is maybe not something that I came into this call with, but just that, Bloss, I see you as X, like none of that, which can be helpful, right? Like coaching is so much of that,
Yeah.
of like, I believe in you and you can do this, but it seems like that's not maybe the right way to think of it. It's not like a coaching, it's more of just like a radical presence. I don't know, maybe let me form that as a question. Like, do you think of it as coaching, or is it closer to therapy, or is it closer to like, how do you think of your role and sort of the other guides' roles in the epicenter?
So I would say it's a combination of healing and guidance. So not coaching, although we're definitely supportive when somebody says, "Hey, I've done something I'm really proud of." We're all there for it, of course. But we're really careful not to say like you are X, because any of those labels, in fact, that's our exercise today. We are having them put down all the labels that they've assigned to themselves or other people have given to them.
Yeah.
And I often use this example with parents because I think it's really powerful. As a kid, I was labeled as smart,
Yeah.
and people saw that as a really positive thing. But for me, it became this burden. I was the smart one. I had to excel in things. I had to take all these classes. I felt a pressure from it that I don't think anybody intended. They were just trying to be really nice to me. So we don't realize sometimes that when we hand somebody a label, we're handing them a whole set of expectations that they may or may not want. So we are super careful about you ours. And instead, even when people present us with something they've done, we don't ever say like, "Oh, I think that's great," or "I love it." We say, "Oh, wow, you've done something amazing with color there that I didn't expect," or "What do you think about that?" It's so great to see you so proud of something you've done. That type of language, it gives them back the agency, and then they're not doing something for you. They're doing it for themselves. Yeah. So it's this healing therapy. We don't say therapy because we're not therapists, but it is obviously there's a lot of that in it. And guidance. I think of us as like bumpers. Is that what it's called for bowling?
In bowling, yeah.
Yeah, like that. We're just like gently being like, yeah, maybe that's a little bit too far in that direction. Maybe come over this way. But ultimately, they throw the ball. We're just making sure it doesn't go like way out of bounds.
Yeah. It's and we're such embodied physical creatures. It's easier to understand let your kid fall and scrape their knee and they'll learn, right? Like that's like a tangible thing we can all relate to.
Yeah.
And that bumper thing is it just the analogy occurred to me of just like the emotional version of that, right? It's not like holding someone's hand and having them on a leash so they can never fall. They need to fail, they need to, explore and push the boundary, but you're sort of there to get them back to center a little bit.
Yeah.
Allison, this might be such a simple, naive question that it's stupid, but like, we've spoken about like, heart, mind, and instinct. I think those are kind of like the three pillars we've spoken about. What happens when those are aligned? The older you get and the more you grow up, you kind of tend to lose maybe the heart and the instinct more than mind, at least in sort of like a Western mindset. What what do people get when those are sort of alive and aligned? What does that look like? Is it a lot of this presence? Is it a lot of authenticity? Like, what is sort of like at the end of that rainbow, if you can sort of like wake those three pillars up?
So for me, and I would say I'm not always perfectly aligned. Let's be honest here. I've met maybe only one person who I would say is really actually fully aligned. Um, there's there's contentment. I'm gonna be really careful not use happiness, but
Yeah.
contentment and satisfaction in what you're doing, because it is what you know you're meant to be doing. And that is something I've experienced. I can feel in you, you've experienced it too. It's very different feeling from happiness. Uh, it feels like living. So there's a piece of this that feels like you're alive, which if you're hearing this, you'll know what I mean, because I think we've all experienced it as we grow up. There's sometimes a part where you go through and you actually don't feel alive. You don't even understand what you're doing every day and why you're doing it. That falls away.
Does that have anything to do with like a long-term vision? Like, is it something about like I'm building towards this beautiful thing in the future, and you kind of have maybe like not a clear path? I don't mean that at all, but just like a higher purpose, a higher meaning. Is that one and the same? Do you think of those differently, or yeah?
Yeah, I definitely think building towards a vision for sure, but knowing that that vision keeps changing so that the goal is to outgrow yourself every day. When you have that idea that actually you're never done, then you always have this thing to be working towards. That's very, very important. But also in appreciating what you have around you, because when you really are able to listen to your heart, you start to realize, I'm looking at this tree up like across the way here, and it's gorgeous. It's fall. It's absolutely gorgeous. And there's something amazing about just being able to look at that and go, I can't believe I get to see that. That brings so much joy and contentment in a moment. There is presence, of course, in being able to be in a moment. And then there's this other piece that I'm not really sure I can even put into words, that there's this, I'm going to call it potential of humanity that I feel is very much untapped, unspoken about. It's just kind of under the surface of things that we hear about from people who, let's say, meditate a lot or are in sort of traditions where they can tap into an intuitive understanding of things, or understand things in a deeper way than maybe we tend to understand them in Western culture. That comes with a lot of this alignment. So this feeling of, oh, this is where I need to be, or precognitive dreams, or some of these other things, that they start to happen when you start to calm down what's going on up here. And that is transformative and very powerful, because that starts to guide your life. In fact, you learn to listen instead of, and here is funny because I'm just talking, but actually in most of my day, I just listen and ask questions. I get to be you. So it changes how you interact with the world. It's just a very different way of being. And I'm curious what happens when humanity can listen and not want to assert. So much of our need for control and manipulating other people is because we feel so unsettled in ourselves. And when we're stable in ourselves, when those three things are aligned, we're well. That's well-being to me. Everything in right relationship with each other, everything in your body with the right relationship, your mind with your body, everything. People are just not needing then to control other people, and that changes the dynamic of what our society looks like.
Yeah, it's beautiful, Allison. Maybe we shift gears a little bit of like, again, we've hinted sort of like maybe focusing on parents for a second.
Yeah.
What can we do in
I'd
our
love to do that.
And then, if we scale that forward, what does the epicenter look like? What's the next step? What's what can that look like in 5 years and 10 years? Maybe we'll touch on that after, but yeah, just to, give me, frankly, selfishly, some tools and some ideas and stuff to do at home. And again, I think it's such a, you know, uh, have your own house in order before you tell other people how to do it themselves. And so yeah, what can I do as a dad with two young girls? The language I use, the presence, the questioning, the curiosity. Either major mistakes you see that are relatively easy to avoid or just be aware of, and then maybe on the positive side, things we can do proactively to encourage these things.
Yeah, I would love to share that. Thank you so much for asking that question. I want to start by saying, so I am not a parent, and I recognize that being a parent is so much more difficult than having a class of students for a couple of hours, for a week. It is not the same thing. So when I say things about here are things you can try, please understand that I recognize that most parents are in a situation where they are working and taking care of a house and have children, and that it is not possible to be fully present to a child at all times in that circumstance. I get it. That's why we want to exist, because this isn't the way our society is structured right now. It's simply impossible for two people with children in the confines of four walls to be fully present all the time. I get that. This is not a knock on you. I really feel like that's important to say, because if you put me in that same situation, I'd be no different than anybody else.
Yeah.
Okay, so with that caveat, because I am not in that situation, I get to see things differently. So here are some things that I would say. So first with presence, one of the things that we hear repeatedly from children, especially young children, is that they want to have a phone. And when we ask them why they want to have a phone, it's because they want to communicate with their parents. So just pay attention to when you're on your phone. I try really hard. I mean, we have to have our phones on us in case of an emergency, but when that phone rings, if I'm with a child, I just don't look at it. So have intentional time where you are looking eye to eye with your child without your phone, letting them know that they're more important than whatever's happening on a device with whatever's going on far away. Particularly because for younger kids, they're not understanding what's actually happening on that device. So to them, it's like an inanimate object. I've got a tape measure here. I might as well be fascinated by the tape measure.
Yeah.
They don't get that there's something here that's another person, a connection, whatever. It's just a thing that you're giving your attention to instead of them. It sends a message that they're not as important as the thing that's holding your attention. So that's one really simple thing. Another thing for yourself is to just start to pay attention to yourself. There's a phrase that I really like that a guy named Gurdjieff uses. It's called remember yourself. So remember yourself. Where are you in space and time at this moment? Can you feel your feet? Do you know where your hands are? How do you feel? Do a check-in every so often on yourself. Because once you start to do that for yourself, it's a lot easier to be present for another person when you can be present for yourself. If you are all up here, it's going to be very difficult, even if you're looking at somebody, to not be running your mind all the time. So pay attention to yourself. When you're listening to another person, notice, am I having thoughts right now? What am I thinking about? Can I quiet those down so that I can actually listen to what's being said to me? A lot of what people say isn't here at all.
Yeah.
Especially with kids. They don't have words for a lot of how they're feeling. A lot of what people say is going to happen in their eyes. It's going to happen in their body language. It's going to happen how they're feeling. So practice that on yourself, practice with other adults.
Yeah. And Allison, you sparked something in me. We started early on in this conversation sort of disconnected versus connected, right? And I at least made the connection of like myself versus other people, other things, whatever it might be. But there's also that disconnection between your own thoughts, right? Like I am not my thoughts. Like
Yes.
I can let that pass. And what you're just saying there is like, yeah, I can have that conversation. I might be here, but my mind might be somewhere else and I'm not really here. And, that's a lot easier, if it's 5 in the morning and your girls wake up and, to be distracted and to be annoyed and to have other things you're thinking about or whatever it might be. But anyway, that connection of just like, yeah, it's not just like connection to other people, but connection to your own thoughts, your own body, your own presence.
Yes. In fact, that I think is all that is so much of it, because again, back to that space of everything being one, actually what you bring, what creates something in your children. So they are very sensitive beings. So what you bring into a space, they pick up on right away. And a lot of times when we have children who are dysregulated, which doesn't happen very often in our spaces because we're not dysregulated. But over the summer is really interesting. We had one class that was dysregulated one day. And in that space, I could have said, well, the kids, have these trauma and this and this happened. But actually, the person I work with and I, his name's Connor, we stepped back and we said, what did we do here that caused these kids to have a meltdown today? What happened? And we realized actually that in that day, we were experimenting without having a structure to the day. And those kids really needed the structure. So it was a wholly on us. So that mindset of what am I bringing into the space that is causing my child to have this reaction? Again, not that it's your fault. Like, please, this is not a blame thing. It's just a like, oh, did I have a challenging day at work that I just brought into the space and now my kid is like anxious? Okay, maybe I should just let me go into the bathroom for a minute, like
Yeah.
take a shower, whatever I need to do. Breathe, come back, and then come back into the space. And you'll notice that what you bring, they mirror really, especially when they're little.
Allison, we play this game, and it's more for my benefit, honestly, but again, with our 4-year-old, but we play this game of like, I ask her, what do you think I'm thinking about right now? And to try to put her like into my shoes, right?
Uh-huh.
And again, when she asks questions, almost always is like, well, what do you think? And again, to prompt that thinking and everything else. But we started doing this more like putting myself in her shoes, right? I can't read yet. I'm learning my letters, but I don't know it. You have no other cues. And again, we're so like up here, we're text based, we're visual based. I'm like getting out of my own head into like what this 4-year-old sees. And again, the tape measure thing is perfect. Like she sees me doing this instead of looking her in the eye. Like, okay, like that's loud and clear. Like there is no context. There's an important thing on the other end. Like just, oh, Papa's doing this other thing. And it's just like such a good reminder of like this little human has such a different perspective and intuition, right? Of just like, oh, I can read verbal cues better than you, even though you're 30 years older than me. I have like all this like, or maybe it's just like lack of bad habits at her age at this point where, she doesn't have to like wade through all the BS in her mind or whatever it might be. But anyway, that what you're saying just resonates a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. That's beautifully said. And that's another, like you raise a really good point. Intuition in children is really strong. So trust that in them. Try not to bring fear into a space if you can. So we worked with a kid a couple summers ago that could climb trees. Like this kid is, if he wants to be, he could be the free solo guy. I mean,
Yeah.
his climbing ability is unbelievable. Tall at the top of the tallest trees, no problem. He was like 7. So as he's climbing, there can't be a part of me that thinks he's going to fall, because then I'm putting that on him. Why would I do that? So try really hard not to put your fears, this is going to happen to you, onto a child. Let them experience it. And I get like you're responsible for the well-being of another human. You don't want something to happen to them on your watch. Also, there's something really powerful in letting and trusting them to know what they can do, because you might be amazed at what they're capable of because they aren't afraid. So try not to cultivate fear. We don't need more fearful people. We need more fearless people. And that can be a physical thing. It can be, anything. I learned to read, for example, at the age of 3, because my parents didn't think that there should be a limit on when I started to pick up a book and learn how to read. That's amazing. I'm not some super genius. It was just they thought, yeah, sure, you want to read, go for it. We don't have a set time around that. But on the other hand, I was really fearless, so I would injure myself a lot. So then my parents took to telling me I was clumsy. And here's just an interesting example of how the patterns get laid down. So I learned I was clumsy. I was a klutz. That's what I was told. And even though that's not actually true, I took that on. So I used to fall every year running. So I used to run competitively, but I would trip and fall and break something every year from the age of 20 till about the age of like 35. Just think about 15 years, I would break something every year because I was a klutz.
Yeah.
And then I learned what was happening. I saw it. Like I wasn't even aware of it, right? It was just a story I told myself, whatever. Um, and then I just said, wait, I'm not clumsy at all. Hold on. I'm just not paying attention when I'm running. I'm not being present. So I stopped. And when I haven't broken anything in years. So all of these things, like being aware of you as an adult, what you tell yourself as stories, know that that gets told to your kids. Being aware of what you tell your kids as stories about who and what they are gets imprinted at a very young age and then becomes a habit that is very, very difficult to break as they get older. So just being aware of what you're creating, I think, is ultimately it. And then the last bit I will say is like play is a wonderful thing. And one of the things I think the kids notice in us right away is how willing we are to just play with them and how much they miss that. So kids remember us. We might have them in class for 1 hour, and 2 years later, I'm noticing in the hallways, kids are like, oh my gosh, it's you. Well, why do they remember us of all the adults that they meet? It's because we're right there with them, matching. There's a word called attunement, which basically means to tune into somebody and match, where they are. We attune to them exactly. We are like right there. It's fun. Try it, like remember it's fun to play. There's a reason humans are meant to play. So that would be the high level advice I would give. Is that helpful? Yeah.
Oh, it's super helpful. Yeah, and just, I think for us, and I get my wife's a teacher. She's super thoughtful with like the language, and I've learned so much about that because it's not ever taught. Like, there's no
No,
class of like,
no.
how to like effectively speak to kids. Like that's not a thing parents have to do before they have kids. But like she's really good with what you're saying, like avoiding you are, or and like the natural inclination when you get a drawing is like, oh, that's amazing, I love it. And she's like, whoa, 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 like, oh, we need to like reword that just like slightly for these reasons. Before there's another essay I'll send you. It's by this guy, Paul Graham, that I really like. And the title is Keep Your Identity Small. And you can already guess what it's about, but just like the more labels you have on your life, the more constricted you are, right? I am smart and I do this and I study this and I go this and I'm surrounded with these friends. Like, all right, well, your life is planned. Like,
Yes.
that's lots. Like that's your whole world. And so anyway, that removal of labels. So just to make that language part more concrete for me, it's like being careful of you are, even positive things. You are smart, you are fast, you are strong. All those can be constricting in its own ways.
Mhm.
What other language things would you sort of call out, right? Of seems positive on the first blush. You're giving them a compliment, but maybe the ripple effects aren't as healthy. Anything else come to mind there?
The I loves, right? I likes, I loves, because it teaches them to do things for your approval, which we all know what that feels like to do things for our parents' approval. So you can pretty much get rid of that quickly by not doing those things. Um, this is coming to mind not as I've never thought of this before. So here's a great example of where an idea comes from, right? So like created from you, but like I'm looking up because it's coming from it's like coming, it's right here. There's something around also the freedom around letting your children explore and be, that that there's also power in giving them space. And I would say, like, in terms of language, it's like it's that attunement, it's matching their language, matching their enthusiasm, it's matching, it's mirroring, it's almost exactly mirroring. So I imagine myself as as much as I can be, a fully reflective surface, which is when I say I'm not in it, right? So I'm a fully reflective surface. You give me something, I'm giving it back to you. Not exactly, right? So it's not mimicking, it's reflecting back so that they can see what they're doing clearly and make adjustments as they need to. And maybe the last thing on questions is tone. So we teach, when we work with other teachers in classes, because we work with schools in addition to other organizations, we teach them about how to ask a question. In the United States, in the Western culture, we tend to ask a question on I'm going to do this with my hand. It goes down, right? What do you think? If you can remember to open up your language, what do you think? It goes up. Oh, wow. See how like open that is? So open up your vowels, open up your questions to go up. How does that feel? Right? Like that's a curious question. Things that end like this, they close. I mean, obviously you can tell, right? Things that go like this are open, this is closed. So be thoughtful in how you ask the question, because your tone says whether or not you want an answer to that question.
Yeah.
So those
Which a
are
lot of times you don't, right? You can ask
yeah.
that question for a whole bunch of different reasons and not actually be curious.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And then I guess one other thing around like discipline, because there are things that happen, right, where we have to be like, maybe not that, right? Like, so we have our rules are kindness to yourself and others, and you can't touch somebody without asking them first. That second one is really powerful for younger kids because it eliminates, you don't have to say like, don't hit, don't this, don't that. It's just, did you ask if it was okay to hit that person? Right. And normally they're going to say no. So, and you have to respect their answer, whatever they say. So like that, just that reframing of ask permission before you touch somebody also gives them really healthy boundaries on being touched and how they touch other people. Which I think is also really powerful in general as people get older, because touch is such a powerful communicator and such a powerful language. So we're talking about verbal, but be mindful of how you touch somebody. So what you're thinking when you touch somebody, it gets transmitted to them. So when you give somebody a hug, same thing, try to be fully present with that hug. Notice what you're feeling, notice what they're feeling. Notice how you grab somebody. If they're in danger, how you remove them out of that danger. Just pay attention to your touch, because boy, does that say a lot more than anything that comes out of here.
Yeah. It's beautiful, Allison. So I want an epicenter in my Connecticut backyard. How do I get one? No, what are the next steps? What are you doing now? How can we support you? What's the sort of like next big step for your vision?
Thank you for asking that. So it needs to have a home, right? So we work out of all these different spaces, but the reality is like we get to bring this to a space, but the adults in the space don't always love this because they haven't had this conversation. They don't understand the intention, and control is a real issue. A lot of people have. So it freaks them out how little control we have in a space on purpose. We need our own space, and it needs to be for more than 2 hours at a time, because to really bring somebody back to themselves, it takes time. Just like we would go to a retreat center, we want that for kids. Nothing like this exists in the world. There's no place that kids can go without their parents that's actually a retreat space. There's camps, obviously, but they have a different intention that's also beautiful. So we're looking for property, whether it comes in the form of raising money to purchase property, having somebody donate property, space for kids to be. and for us to actually start this. And then the vision is that this becomes something that is in multiple places, so that it isn't just in one space, but it starts in one space. We teach people how to do this work, and then it can blossom and go be throughout the world.
Mm.
Because this to me is, I mean, the epicenter is a space, but it's a movement. It's a movement and radically transforming how we interact with the young people in our world to actually empower them, to have them know that they have the power within themselves to bring the gifts that they're here to bring to humanity. Because selfishly, I mean, ultimately, this is all selfish, right? That's the world I want to live in. Yeah.
Yeah, me too. Um, and to make it specific, I guess, or location makes sense, or a location, and we've shared a few specific places, but just to broaden the aperture for people listening in and people connecting with us later, I think you're looking somewhere in Colorado, and like, where ideally does the first epicenter live? How do you think about that?
So for me, it's a place I have to be able to. I would love to live that I'm inspired by. So that tends to be mountains, ocean, things like that. So yeah, Colorado West Coast tends to be where my heart goes, but there are places on the East Coast as well that I think satisfy that. Um, the main thing is that initially it'll be supported by the community, of course, that can drive to it, because the first year it probably won't be people flying from all over. So a place that's close enough to a community of people who would be supportive of this idea. And that's not everywhere in this country. If we're talking the United States, I'm also open to another place, like another country. I'm so open for this to just happen, because it just needs to be a model for people to model off of. And then I'm happy for people to take the idea and go, let's make more of them, you know? Um, so the community that's supportive, a space that's inspiring, it needs a really large tract of space, because we haven't spoken a lot about nature aside from my just being like, that tree is beautiful. But nature is a beautiful mirror for us, because nature is what it is. There's no tree that's like, my dad wanted me to be a blueberry bush, so I'm just trying really hard to be a blueberry bush. And you're
Yeah.
like, you're an oak tree, you know? An oak tree is an oak tree is an oak tree, and that's beautiful. So we use that a lot when we work with kids, having them see nature as a really good mirror. So we're looking for, I would say at least 100 acres to give enough space for the buildings and space to explore, and an inspiring environment that has enough resources to sustain itself given the world as it's changing, and a community that could support it to begin with, and then close enough to an airport as people want to fly in and be a part of it so that it can grow. Yeah.
What approximately is a size of a community that would make this sustainable, right? Is it 20 kids? Is it 100 kids? What does that kind of look like?
So we have a model where we could serve at least 1,000 kids a year. And I'd like to serve as many children as we can. Um, the model being that they would come for 2 weeks, a week or two to the retreat center. And then we actually have a year-long program that they can engage in to sustain a lot of what they've learned and the ideas. That's for children and their parents, so that everybody can kind of work together to support the child. So for that, 1,000 children is probably, 5,000 families or something like that. So a fairly large community of people. But having said that, I live right now in a very small community of 8,000 people, but there are 4,000 students at the high school. There's only 8,000 people in the community. I don't understand that math, but anyway, I can't really wrap my head around how this has happened. And 4,000 students in a high school is more than enough to sustain something like this, to at least to get it started.
Amazing. Allison, for people who want to learn more, support, get involved somehow, what do they do? How do they find you? Where should they go? What do we do from here?
Yeah, reach out, please. I'd love to hear from you. Also, I was even thinking if we wanted to do something like, we could hold a seminar for parents to talk about these ideas more in depth. We have this book that we wrote for families. We could share that. Like, I'm all about getting this idea out to people.
Yeah. Yeah.
Please reach out, email. We have a website. So the organization is called the Epicenter. The website is the word BE dash the dash epicenter.org, because of course you are the epicenter everywhere you go. So reach out to us. I'm through email, our website, connect through Lattice work. I'm here now. I'm so grateful to be a part of this community. It's a fantastic, beautiful community that you've created. So thank you for letting me be part of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and let's talk. Like, let's bring this idea beyond where it is right now and bring it to the world, because children need it desperately. Adults need it desperately.
Yeah. Allison, it's a beautiful vision. It's been amazing to get to know you. We got connected through Tom, who's also in this little fun community we've built. And it's amazing just to spider out the network and meet people like you who are building amazing things. I'll selfishly just say we should just do that parenting thing sometime soon.
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah.
I would love that so much.
And we can send out a little poll and get other people to sign up and make this a little more dynamic than just you and me, but get, real people's frustrations and questions and
Yes.
see what struggles they have and all that good stuff. So you at least have one person who shows up in me and Danielle, one family. But yeah, Allison, thank you for your time, for everything you're building. I'm excited to keep on this journey with you and see how the Epicenter comes to life.
Thank you. Thank you so much for letting me share all this, for giving me the space to share all these ideas. Yeah, I hope they're useful for people listening, and please engage in these ideas. I love this. I love even just your being like, oh, I don't know about that. Can you create in that other space? Like, I love that.
Yeah.
This is, like I said, this is not capital T truth. These are ideas we get to play. Let's play with them.
Yeah. I love it, Allison. Thank you again. This is really beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. We'll talk soon.
Bye.
Bye.